Alright, where were we? Put on a few eggs. There's a good fellow. Gandalf called after him, as the hobbit stumped off to the pantries. And just bring out the cold chicken and pickles. Seems to know as much about the inside of my larders as I do myself, thought Mr. Baggins, who was feeling positively flummoxed, and was beginning to wonder whether a most wretched adventure had not come right into his house. By the time he had all his bottles and dishes and knives and forks and glasses and plates and spoons and things piled up on trays, he was getting very hot and red in the face, and annoyed. Confiscate and be bothered these dwarves, he said aloud. Wanted they come and lend a hand. Lo and behold, there stood Balin and Dwellin at the door of the kitchen, and Philly and Killy behind them. Before he could say knife, they had whisked the trays and a couple of small tables into a parlor and set everything out afresh. Gandalf sat at the head of the party with his 13 dwarves all around, and Bilbo sat on a stool at the fireside, nibbling at a biscuit. His appetite was quite taken away, and trying to look as if this was all perfectly ordinary and not at least an adventure. The dwarves ate, and talked, and time caught on. At last they pushed their chairs back, and Bilbo made a move to collect the plates and glasses. I suppose you will all stay to supper, he said, in our politest, unpressing tones. Of course, said Thorin, and after all, we shan't get to the business till late, and we must have some music first. Now to clear up. Thereupon the 12 dwarves, not Thorin, he was too important, and stayed talking to Gandalf, jumped to their feet, and made tiny piles of all the things. Off they went, not waiting for trays, balancing columns of plates, each with a bottle on the top. With one hand, while the hobbit ran after them and was squeaking with fright. Please be careful, and please don't trouble. I can manage, but the dwarves only started to sing. Chip the glasses and crack the plates, blunt the knives and bend the forks. That's what Bilbo Baggins hates. Smash the bottles and burn the corks. Cut the cloth and tread on the fat. Pour the milk on the pantry floor. Leave the bones on the bedroom mat. Splash the wine on every door. Dunk the crocks in the boiling pot. Pound them up in a thumping pole. And when you're finished, if any are whole, send them down the hall to roll. That's what Bilbo Baggins hates, so carefully with the plates. And of course they did none of these dreadful things, and everything was cleaned and put away safe as quick as lightning, while the hobbit was turning round and round in the middle of the kitchen trying to see what they were doing. Then they went back and found Thorin with his feet on the fender, smoking a pipe. He was blowing the most enormous smoke rings, and wherever he told one to go, it went up the chimney, or behind the clock of the mantelpiece, or under the table, or round and round the ceiling. But wherever it went, it was not quick enough to escape Gandalf. Pop! It sent a smaller smoke ring from a short clay pipe straight through each one of Thorin's. Then Gandalf's smoke ring would go green and come back to hover over the wizard's head. He had quite a cloud of them about him already, and in the dim light it made him look strange and sorcerous. Bilbo stood still and watched. He loved smoke rings, and then he blushed to think how proud he had been yesterday of the smoke rings he had sent up in the wind over the hill. Now for some music, said Thorin. Bring out the instruments. Killy and Philly rushed for their bags and brought back little fiddles. Dori, Nori, and Ori brought out flutes from somewhere inside their coats. Bomber produced a drum from the hall. Biffer and Bofer went out too, and came back with clarinets, and they had left among the walking sticks. Dwellin and Balin said, "Excuse me, I left mine on the porch." "Just bring mine in with you," said Thorin. They came back with violas as big as themselves, and with Thorin's harp wrapped in a green cloth. It was a beautiful golden harp, and when Thorin struck it with music, when Thorin struck it, the music began all at once, so sudden and sweet that Bilbo forgot everything else. He was swept away into dark lands under strange moons, far over the water and very far from the hobbit hole under the hill. The dark came into the room from the little window that opened on the side of the hill. The firelight flickered. It was April, and they still played on, while the shadow of Gandalf's beard wagged against the wall. The dark filled all the room, and the fire died down, and the shadows were lost, and the fire died down. And the shadows were lost, and they still played on, and suddenly first one and then another began to sing as they played, deep-throated singing, of the dwarves of the deep places of their ancient homes. And this is like a fragment of their song, if it can be like their song without their music. I'm gonna try. I'm just gonna do deep. Far over the misty mountains cold, to dungeons deep and caverns old, we must away ere break of day, to seek the pale enchanted gold. The dwarves of the yore made mighty spells, while hammers fell like ringing bells. In places deep where dark things sleep, in hollow halls beneath the fells. For ancient kings and elvish lords, there are many a gleaming golden hoard. They shaped and wrought, and light they caught, to hide in gems of hilt of sword. On silver necklaces they strung, the flowering stars on crowns they hung. The dragon fire and twisted wire, they meshed the light of moon and sun. Far over the misty mountains cold, the dungeons deeps and caverns cold, we must away ere break a day to claim our long-forgotten gold. Goblets they carved there for themselves, and harps of gold where no man delves. There lay there long, and many a song they sung unheard by men or elves. The pines were roaring on the height, the winds were moaning in the night. The fire was red, it flames spread. The trees like torches blazed with light. The bells were ringing in the dale, and men looked up with faces pale. The dragon's ire, more fierce than fire, laid low their towers and their houses frail. The mountains smoked beneath the moon. The dwarves they heard the tramp of doom. They fled their hall to dying fall, beneath his feet, beneath the moon. Far over the misty mountains grim, to dungeons deep and caverns dim, we must away or break a day, to win our harps and gold from him. Ooh. As they sang, the hobbit felt the love of the beautiful things made by hands and by the cunning and by magic moving through him. A fierce and jealous love. The desire the hearts adores. Then something tookish woke up inside of him, and he wished to go see the great mountains, and hear the pine trees and the waterfalls, and explore the caves, and wear his sword instead of a walking stick. He looked out the window. The stars were out in the dark sky above the trees. He thought of the jewels of the door shining in the dark caverns. Suddenly in the wood beyond the water, a flame leapt up. Probably somebody lighting a wood fire, and he thought of plundering dragons settling on his quiet hill and kindling it all to flames. He shuddered, and very quickly he was plain. Mr. Baggins of Baggin Underhill again. He got up trembling. He had less than half a mind to fetch the lamp, and more than half a mind to pretend to and go and hide behind the beer barrels in the cellar, and not come out again until all the dwarves had gone away. Suddenly he found that the music and the singing had stopped, and they were all looking at him with eyes shining in the dark. "Where are you going?" said Thorin, in a tone that seemed to show that he guessed both halves of the hobbit's mind. "What about a little light?" said Bilbo apologetically. "We like the dark," said the dwarves. "Dark for dark business, and there are many hours before dawn." "Of course," said Bilbo, and sat down in a hurry. He missed the stool and sat on the fender, knocking of the poker and the shovel with a crash. "Hush," said Gandalf. "Let Thorin speak." And this is how Thorin began. "Gandalf, dwarves, and Mr. Baggins, we are not together in the house of our friend and fellow conspirator, this most excellent and audacious hobbit. May the hair on his toes never fall out. All praise to his wine and ale." He paused for breath and for a polite remark from the hobbit, but the compliments were quite lost on poor Bilbo Baggins, who was wagging his mouth in protest of being called audacious, and worst of all, fellow conspirator. Though no noise came out, he was so flummoxed, so Thorin went on. "We are met to discuss our plans, our ways, means, policy, and devices. We shall see soon before the break of day start our long journey, a journey from which some of us, or perhaps all of us, except our friend and counselor, the ingenious wizard Gandalf, may never return. It is a solemn moment. Our object is, I take it, well known to us all. To the estimable Mr. Baggins, and perhaps to one or two of the younger dwarves, I think I should be right in naming Killy and Filly, for instance. The exact situation at the moment require a little brief explanation." This was Thorin's style. He was an important dwarf. If he had been allowed, he would probably have gone on like this until he was out of breath, without telling anyone there anything that was not known already. But he was rudely interrupted. Poor Bilbo couldn't bear it any longer. And may never return, he began to feel a shriek coming up inside, and very soon it burst out like the whistle of an engine coming out of a tunnel. All the dwarves sprang up, knocking over the table. Gandalf struck a blue light on the end of his magic staff, and in its firework glare, the poor little hobbit could be seen kneeling on the hearth rug, shaking like a jelly that was all melting. Then he fell flat on the floor and kept on calling out, struck by lightning, over and over again. That was all he could get out of him for a long time. So they took him and laid him out, all the way on the drawing room sofa with a drink in his elbow, and we went back to their dark business. Excitable little fellow, said Gandalf, as they sat down again. Gets funny queer fits, but he is one of the best, as fierce as a dragon in a pinch. If you've ever seen a dragon in a pinch, you will realize that this is the only poetically exaggeration applied to any hobbit, even old Took's great-granduncle Bullroarer, who was so huge, for a hobbit, that he could ride a horse. He charged the ranks of the goblin of Mount Graham in the Battle of the Green Fields, and knocked their king, Gulfinbull's head clean off with a wooden club. It sailed 100 yards through the air, and went down a rabbit hole. And in this way, the battle was won, and a game of golf invented at the same moment. In the meanwhile, however, Bullroarer's gentler descendant was reviving in the drawing room. After a while and a drink, he crept nervously to the door of the parlor. This is what he heard. Glowing speaking, of some sorts, more or less like that. He will do. Do you think it was all very well for Gandalf to talk about this hobbit being fierce, but one shriek like that in the moment of excitement would be enough to wake the dragon and all its relatives, and killed a lot of us. I think it sounded more like fright than excitement. In fact, if it had not been for the sign on the door, I should have been sure we had come to the wrong house. As soon as I clapped eyes on that little fellow bobbing and pulling on the mat, I had my doubts. He looks more like a grocer than a burglar. Then Mr. Baggins turned the handle and went in. The Took side had won. He suddenly felt like he could go without bed and breakfast to be thought fierce. As a little fellow bobbing on the mat, it almost made him really fierce. And many a time afterwards, the Baggins part regretted what he did now. And he said to himself, Bilbo, you were a fool. You walked right in and put your foot in it. Pardon me, he said. If I have overheard words that you were saying, I don't pretend to understand that you were talking about, or your reference to burglars. But I think I am right in believing, this is what he called being on his dignity, that you think I am no good. I will show you. I have no signs on my door. It was painted a week ago, and I'm quite sure you have come to the wrong house. As soon as I saw your funny faces on the doorstep, I had my doubts. But treat it as a right one. Tell me what you want done, and I will try it. I have to walk from here to the east of East and fight the wild wereworms in the last desert. I had a great granduncle once, Bullroarer Took. Yes, that was a long time ago, said Cloyne. I was talking about you. And I assure you there is a mark on this door, the usual one in the trade, or used to be. Burglar wants a good job, plenty of excitement, and reasonable reward. That's how it usually read. You can say expert treasure hunter instead of burglar, if you like. Some of them do. It's all the same to us. Gandalf told us that there was a man of the sort in these parts looking for a job at once, and that he arranged for a meeting here, this Wednesday tea time. Of course there is a mark, said Gandalf. I put it there myself, for very good reasons. You asked me to find the 14th man for your expedition, and I chose Mr. Baggins. Just let any one of you choose the wrong man or the wrong house, and you can stop at 13 and have all the bad luck you like, or go back to digging coal. He scowled so angrily at Gloin that the dwarf huddled back in his chair, and when Bilbo tried to open his mouth to ask a question, he turned and frowned at him and stuck out his bushy eyebrows, till Bilbo shut his mouth tight with a snap. That's right, said Gandalf. Let's have no more argument. I have chosen Mr. Baggins, and that ought to be enough for all of you. If I say he is a burglar he is, or will be when the time comes. There is a lot more in him than you guess, and a deal more than he has any idea of himself. You may, possibly, all live to thank me. Now, Bilbo, my boy, fetch the lamp, and let's have a little light on this. On the table in the light of the big lamp with a red shade, he spread a piece of parchment rather like a map. This was made by Thror, your grandfather, Thorin, he said in answer to the dwarf's excited questions. It is a plan of the mountain. I don't see that this will help us much, said Thorin disappointingly after a glance. I remember the mountain well enough and the lands about it. I know where Mirkwood is, and Withered Heath, where the great dragons bred. There is a dragon marked in red on the mountain, said Balin, but it will be easy enough to find him without that, if ever we arrive there. There is one point that you haven't noticed, said the wizard, and that is the secret entrance. You see that the rune on the west side and the hand pointing to it from the other runes? That marks a hidden passage in the lower halls. It may have been a secret once, said Thorin, but how do we know that is a secret any longer? Excuse me, allergies. Lived there long enough to find out anything there is to know about caves. He may, but he can't have used it for years and years. Why? Because it is too small. 5 feet high the door, and 3 may walk abreast, says the rune. The small could not creep into a hole that size, not even when he was a young dragon. Certainly not after devouring so many of the dwarfs and the men of Dale. It seems a great big hole to me, squeaked Bilbo, who had no experience of dragons, and only of hobbit holes. He was getting excited and interested again, so that he forgot to keep his mouth shut. He loved maps, and in his hall there hung a large one of the country round, with all his favorite walls marked on it in red ink. How could such a large door be kept secret from everybody outside, apart from the dragon, he asked. He was only a little hobbit, so you must remember. In lots of ways, said Gandalf. But in what way this one had been hidden, we don't know without going to see. From what it says on the map, I should guess that there is a closed door which has been made to look exactly like the side of the mountain. That is the usual dwarves' method. I think that is right, isn't it? Quite right, said Thorin. Also, went on Gandalf, I forgot to mention with the map went a key, a small and curious key. Here it is, said Thorin, and handed to Thorin a key with a long barrel and intricate wards made of silver. Keep it safe. Indeed I will, said Thorin, and he fastened upon a fine chain that hung about his neck and under his jacket. Now things began to look more hopeful. This news alters them much for the better. So far, we have no clear idea what to do. We ought to be going east, as quiet and carefully as we could, as far as the Long Lake. After that, the trouble would begin. A long time before what? If I know anything about the roads east, interrupted Gandalf. We might go from there up along the river running, went on Thorin, taking no notice, and so to the ruins of Dale, the old town in the valley there, under the shadow of the mountain. But we none of us like the idea of the front gate. The river runs right out of it through the great cliff at the side of the mountain, and out of it comes the dragon too, far too often, unless he has changed. That would be no good, said the wizard, not without a mighty warrior, even a hero. I tried to find one, but warriors are busy fighting one another in distant lands, and in this neighborhood heroes are scarce, or simply not to be found. Swords in these parts are mostly blunt, and axes are used for trees, and shields or cradles or dish covers, and dragons are comfortable far off, and therefore legendary. That is why I settled on burglary, especially when I remember the existence of a side door, and here is our little Bilbo Baggins, the burglar, the chosen and selected burglar. So now let's get on and make some plans. Very well then, said Thorin, supposing the burglar expert gives us some ideas or suggestions. He turned back to mock politeness to Bilbo. First, I should like to know a bit more about things, he said, feeling all confused and a bit shaky inside, but so far still tookish determined to go on with things. I mean about the golden dragon and all that, and how it got there, and who it belongs to, and so on and further. Bless me, said Thorin. Haven't you got a map? And didn't you hear our song? And haven't we been talking about this for hours? All the same, I should like to like it all plain and clear, he said obstinately, putting on his business manner usually reserved for people who tried to borrow money off him, and doing his best to appear wise and prudent and professional and lived up to Gandalf's recommendations. Also, I should like to know about risks, out-of-pocket expenses, time required, and remuneration, and so forth, by which he meant, what am I going to get out of it? And am I going to come back alive? Oh, very well, said Thorin. Long ago, in my grandfather Thror's time, our family was driven out of the far north, and came back with all their wealth and their tools to this mountain on the map. It had been discovered by my far ancestor, Thrain the Old, and now they mined and they tunneled and they made huger halls and greater workshops. In addition, I believe they found a good deal of gold and a great many jewels too. Anyway, they grew immensely rich and famous, and my grandfather was king on the mountain again, and treated with great reverence by the mortal men who lived to the south, and were gradually spreading up the running river as far as the valley overshadowed by the mountain. They built the merry town of Dale, there in those days. Kings used to send for our smiths and reward even the least skillful most richly. Fathers would beg us to take their sons as apprentices and pay us handsomely, especially in food supplies, which we never bothered to grow or find for ourselves. Altogether, those were good days for us, and the poorest of us had money to spend into land, and leisure to make beautiful things just for fun of it, not to speak of the most marvelous and magical toys, the like of which is not to be found in the world nowadays. So my grandfather's halls became full of armor and jewels and carvings and cups, and the toy market of Dale was the wonder of the North. Undoubtedly, that was what brought the dragon. Dragons steal gold and jewels, from men and elves and dwarves, wherever they can find them, and they guard their plunder as long as they live, which is practically forever, unless they are killed, and never enjoy a brass ring of it. Indeed, they hardly know a good bit of work from a bad, although they usually have a good notion of the current market value, and they can't make a thing for themselves, not even mend a little loose scale on their armor. There are lots of dragons in the North in those days, and gold was probably getting scarce up there, with the dwarves flying south and getting killed, and all the general waste and destruction that dragons make going from bad to worse. There was a most specially greedy, strong, and wicked worm called Smog. One day he flew up into the air and came south. The first we heard of it was a noise like a hurricane coming from the north, and the pine trees in the mountains creaking and cracking in the wind. Some of the dwarves who happened to be outside, I was one luckily, a fine adventurous lad in those days, always wandering about, and it saved my life that day. Well, from a good way off we saw the dragon settle on our mountain in a spout of flame. Then he came down the slopes, and when we reached the woods they all went up in fire. By the time all the bells were ringing in Dale and the warriors were arming, the dwarves rushed out of their great gate, and there was the dragon waiting for them. None escaped that way. The river rushed up in steam, and the fog fell on Dale. And in the fog the dragon came on and then destroyed most of the warriors. The usual unhappy story. It was only too common in those days. Then he went back and crept in through the front gate and routed all the halls and the lanes and the tunnels and alleys and cellars and mansions and passages. After that there were no dwarves left alive inside, and he took all their wealth for himself. Probably for that is the dragon's way. He has piled it all up in great heap far inside and sleeps on it for a bed. Later he used it to crawl out of the great gate and come by night to Dale and carry away people, especially maidens, to eat. Until Dale was ruined and all the people dead or gone. What goes on there now I don't know for certain, but I don't suppose anyone lives nearer to the mountain than the far edge of the long lake nowadays. The few of us that were well outside sat and wept in hiding and cursed Smog, and we were unexpectedly joined by my father and my grandfather with singed beards. They looked very grim, but they said very little. When I asked how they had gotten away, they told me to hold my tongue and said that one day, in the proper time, I should know. After that we went away, and we have had to earn our livings as best as we could, up and down the lands, often sinking as low as blacksmith work or even coal mining. But we have never forgotten our stolen treasure. And even now, when I will allow, we have a good bit laid out. I will allow we have a good bit laid by and are not so badly off. Here Thorns stroked the gold chain around his neck. We still mean to get it back, and to bring our curses home to Smog if we can. I have often wondered about my father's and my grandfather's escape. I see now they must have had a private side door which only they knew about, but apparently they made a map. I should like to know how Gandalf got hold of it, and why did it not come down to me, the rightful heir. I did not get hold of it. I was given it, said the wizard. Your grandfather, Thror, was killed, and if you remember, in the Mines of Moria by Agzog the Goblin, cursed his name, yes, said Thorin, and Thrain, your father, and went away on the 21st of April, 100 years ago, last Thursday, has never been seen since. True, said Thorin. Well, your father gave me this to give to you, and if I have chosen my own time and my way of handling it over, you can hardly blame me, considering the trouble I've had to find you. Your father could not remember his own name when he gave me the paper, and he never told me yours. So on the whole, I think I ought to be praised and thanked. Here it is, said he, handing the map over to Thorin. I don't understand the Thorin. And Bilbo felt like he would have liked to say the same. The explanation did not seem to explain. Your grandfather, said the wizard slowly and grimly, gave the map to his son for safety before he went to the mines of Moria. Your father went away to try his luck with the map after your grandfather was killed, and lots of adventures of the most unpleasant sort he had, but he never got near the mountain. How he got there I don't know, but I found him a prisoner in the dungeons of the necromancer. Whatever were you doing there? asked Thorin with a shudder, and all the dwarves shivered. Never you mind. I was finding things out as usual, and the nasty, dangerous business it was. Even I, Gandalf, only just escaped. I tried to save your father, but it was too late. He was witless and wandering, and had forgotten almost everything except the map and the key. We have long ago paid the goblins of Moria, said Thorin. We must give a thought to the necromancer. Don't be absurd. He is an enemy quite beyond the powers of all the dwarves put together. If they could all be collected again from the four corners of the world, the one thing your father wished was for his son to read the map and use the key. The dragon and the mountain are more than big enough tasks for you. Hear, hear, said Bilbo, and actually accidentally said it out loud. Hear what? They all said, turning towards him, and he was so flustered that he answered, Hear what I have got to say. What's that? They asked. Well, I should say that you ought to go east and have a look around. After all, there is the side door, and dragons must sleep sometimes. I suppose if you sit on the doorstep long enough, I dare say you will think of something. And well, don't you know? I think we have talked long enough for one night. And you see what I mean. What about bed and an early start and all that? I will give you a good breakfast before you go. Before we go, I suppose you mean, asked Thorin. Aren't you the burglar? And isn't sitting on the doorstep your job? Not to speak of getting inside the door, but I agree about bed and breakfast. I like eggs with my ham. When starting on a journey, fried not poached, and mind you don't break them. After all the others had ordered their breakfast without so much as a please, which annoyed Bilbo very much, they all got up. The Hobbit had to find room for all of them, and filled all his spare rooms and made beds and chairs and sofas. Before he got them all stowed away and went to his very own little bed, very tired and not altogether happy. One thing he did not make up his mind about was not to bother to get up very early and cook everyone else's wretched breakfast. The tookishness was wearing off, and he was not quite so sure that he was going on any journey in the morning. As he lay in bed, he could hear Thorin still humming to himself in the best bedroom next to him. Far over the misty mountains cold, to dungeons deep and caverns old, we must away or break a day to find our lost, long-forgotten gold. Bilbo went to sleep with that in his ears, and it gave him very uncomfortable dreams. It was long after the break of day when he woke up. And that is now we're on to chapter 2, roast mutton. I might give it a break because my throat's pretty rough. But this was fun. I'm going to continue doing this.